Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be ranking my top 10 favorite authors. This was incredibly hard. So first I want to preface by saying that this ranking is based off of enjoyment, not craft. I think if I were to rank this based off craft, the list would be very different and some of these authors may not even be on there. This is just my enjoyment, authors I think about a lot, authors I continually want to return to, and I just wanted to say that because I don't want people coming for me in the comments saying, oh, but they're a better author. Sure, a lot of these authors probably would be ranked differently if I was doing this based off craft, but I'm not. So this is my personal enjoyment of my favorite authors. I have some potential favorites, which are authors that I haven't read a whole lot by yet, but I think they could be a favorite if I continue reading them. So I'm just going to go through that list really quickly. First, I have Robert Swan, who writes the Empire of the Wolf series, which is Justice of Kings and Tyranny of Faith. Those are the only two books I've read by him. I think that's the only two books he is out. So he could be a potential favorite. I will decide once this series is finished. Next, I have J.R.R. Tolkien. He's on this list because same vein, I haven't finished Lord of the Rings yet. I've only read the first two, so I want to see how that series finishes out before adding him to my favorites list. Next, I have Michael J. Sullivan. I have technically read 6 of his books, but that's only one series. I read The Legends of the First Empire, and I really want to read his other series before deciding if he is a favorite, but I did love Legends of the First Empire. Next, I have Olive E. Blake. Same premise. The Atlas series, I've read the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox, and I loved them, but that's the only 2 books I've read of hers, and she does have a lot of other books out that I want to get to eventually, so once I read those, I will decide if she is going to be on this list. Next, I have Octavia E. Butler. Again, only read 2 books. I've read Parable of the Sower, and I've read Kindred, which were both phenomenal books, absolutely stunning, but only read those 2, and she also has a lot of books, so I have a few of them I own physically. I have a bunch that I have saved at the library, so I do want to read more of her books, and we will see as I read more. Last but not least, I have Becky Chambers. I've read almost all of her novellas, but I've just started her main series, The Wayfarers, so I want to finish The Wayfarers before deciding. Her novellas are some of the best novellas I've ever read, but I want to finish a full series of hers before deciding if she is a favorite. So with that, let's get into my top 10 favorite authors, starting at number 10. Number 10 is Shannon Chakraborty. This is the author of the Davabad trilogy as well as The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. The Davabad trilogy is one of the first adult fantasy series I read when I started really diving deep into adult fantasy, and it is a perfect transitional story from going from YA to adult. There are definitely some adult themes and there are a lot of adult topics and the characters are adults, but there are definitely some YA tropes that are brought over, so it's a perfect bridge series, and it is amazing. One of my favorite series of all time. It is so atmospheric, and it is so well written. The magic is really cool, the plot is amazing, the characters feel great. And then Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi just came out recently, and it feels completely different from Davabad, even though it's set in the same world, but it was still phenomenal, and it has a lot older characters, main characters in her 50s, I think, and it kind of has the found family aspect, all of that stuff that I love in a story. So Shannon Chakraborty is definitely up there as one of my favorite authors. Coming in at number 9 is Stephen King. It was very hard to rank him on this list. I read a lot of Stephen King in high school and early adulthood, so like college-ish. But I haven't really read a lot of his books in the past like 6 or 7 years or so. I do really want to continue reading Stephen King, and I want to try to reread some of my old favorites of his, but right now I feel like I just haven't read a lot of his books recently. So it's hard for me to rank him because a lot of these other authors I've read a lot more recently, so I have this like more recent love for them that feels like it's overshadowing Stephen King's. But I tried to like channel my inner high schooler and remember what I loved about Stephen King's books, and I do think he deserves a spot on this list. Some of my favorite of his books are his horror books, and I think he does horror so well and so beautifully, but he also does slice of life really well, and he really makes you feel for these characters. Some of his books are just absolutely bizarre and make next to no sense, but it just kind of shows the like range Stephen King has. He's such a good author in that he can write a slice of life, he can write a horror, he can write a fantasy, he can write a thriller. Like he can dabble in all of these genres and do well by them. So I think that Stephen King definitely deserves a spot on this list, and I've ranked him at number 9. Coming in at number 8 is Leigh Bardugo. She wrote the Grishaverse books, she wrote the Six of Crows duology, and she also wrote the Ninth House series, the Alex Stern series. I have loved her writing since I started reading the Grishaverse series. And then the Six of Crows duology became one of my favorite duologies series in YA fantasy. It is phenomenal, and I still look back on it very, very fondly. And then Alex Stern came out, which is her first adult series, and it is also so good and so different from the Grishaverse books. It is a urban fantasy set in Yale, and it's very like paranormal and dark and beautifully written. Leigh Bardugo has a way of creating characters that feel very gritty, and their motivations feel very warranted. She, especially in the Alex Stern series, Alex Stern has a very, very rough past and a very rough present, and she shows the ways in which she has to just survive. A lot of times, people do bad things just to survive because otherwise they won't. And a lot of times authors shy away from that. And I think that Leigh Bardugo does an incredible job of showing, yes, what she's doing is bad, but if she didn't do this, she would not survive. And also, some people make mistakes. That does not make them a bad person. So she does an excellent job of like towing that line and showing like what humanity is capable of and how to stay a good person, I guess. She also does a really great job of showing abuse and trauma and making it feel very relatable while also showing the disgusting nature of humanity. So overall, I think Leigh Bardugo is an excellent author. Coming in at number 7 is Christopher Rocchio, who wrote the Sun Eater series. I recently read this series last year, and loved every second of it. The series is so good, and it is so expansive. It spans hundreds of years. It really is a deep, deep dive into Hadrian as a character, and we also get a lot of the space opera, kind of like space travel kind of thing, while also getting a lot of fantasy elements, and it's just a beautiful series, and the prose is really what is the kicker. It's what sells this series. Christopher Rocchio's prose is beautiful. It's like borderline flowery without being overbearing, and there's so many quotable moments, there's so many beautiful lines, and I highly, highly recommend anyone read the Sun Eater series. It's gotten pretty big on BookTube, but outside of BookTube, it's still pretty little known, and I think everyone should be reading it. It's amazing. So definitely check that out if you haven't. Coming in at number 6 is George R.R. Martin. A month ago, he would not have been on this list. I have been rereading A Song of Ice and Fire. I read them a long time ago, and at the time was just too young and also not experienced enough in adult fantasy to really appreciate the series. So I read Storm of Swords last month, and it finally clicked for me that, yeah, he's a great author. I still don't know if this is one of my favorite series of all times, just because I haven't connected with a lot of the characters as well as I have in some of my favorite series, but these are some of the most masterfully plotted books I've ever read, and the craft, I know I said this was not based off craft, but when it comes to A Song of Ice and Fire, you have to talk about the craft, because the plot and the plot progression and the way he drops hints throughout is just so masterfully done, and the expansiveness of the world, the expansiveness of the lore is just so well thought out, and it in turn creates this beautiful experience that the reader has. Even though I was not feeling super connected to the characters, I was still rapidly flipping pages reading this book because I was just so excited to see what would happen. Even though I knew a lot of what would happen because this is technically a reread, I was just so excited for what I was going to pick up on and what the next thing was going to be. His writing is digestible while being still very rich and impactful, and he definitely deserves a spot on this list. Now for the top 5. Coming in at number 5 is Scott Lynch. He's writing the Gentleman Bastard series, which is one of my favorite series of all time, starting with The Lies of Locke Lamora. Scott Lynch has a way of creating a beautiful atmosphere. His books all feel very atmospheric. They all have very different atmospheres too, and it creates a very different vibe for each book, basically. His characters feel very relatable, even though they're doing things that most people can't relate to. What really sells his books for me is his character relationships. The relationships the characters have with each other feel very real, they feel very personal, they feel very intimate, and they feel very rich. And I think that is what kept me turning the page throughout the Gentleman Bastard series, because I just wanted to see these relationships develop through time, while also the plot was buck wild. Like, his plotting is incredible. His heists are masterfully crafted. They're beautiful. They feel very Ocean's 11. And this series and this author are just phenomenal. Coming in at number 4, I have Fonda Lee. She writes the Greenbone Saga as well as some future works that are yet to come. The Greenbone Saga is funny for me because, like, Fonda Lee is my 4th favorite author, and the Greenbone Saga is in my top 10 favorite series. I would never have said that after just reading the first 2. I really enjoyed them a lot. I thought that they were wonderfully crafted. I feel like I didn't totally vibe with the series yet until I read Jade Legacy. And then after reading Jade Legacy, I was just blown away, and everything prior made complete sense, and now I'm so excited to reread them because I think I'll love it so much more. Fonda Lee did something I'd never seen done in fantasy before, and that is she had one book that spanned like 30 years or something. It was like 27 years or something. And it was so well done to where I didn't feel like I was missing too much. And I still felt super connected to the characters, even though we were only getting these small vignettes in their lives. And by the end, I was a puddle on the floor. No other author could have done that or has successfully done that I've read yet. And that's why I've put her up here. After finishing Jade Legacy, the whole series made sense for me, and I loved it so much. And I think that requires just excellent craft, but also just really gets you with these characters and the plot, and just everything that goes into this story was just beautiful. Coming in at number 3 is Brandon Sanderson. Stereotypical, I know. Brandon Sanderson writes the Stormlight Archive, Mistborn, as well as a bunch of other stuff in the Cosmere, and then a bunch of stuff outside the Cosmere. Dude doesn't stop writing. And the reason he is number 3 on my list is a lot of it is his character work, but also his magic systems. His characters, he has some of my favorite characters in fiction, and he can write such a impactful story with pretty simple prose. And simple prose does not mean bad prose. A lot of people dunk on Brandon Sanderson's prose because it is accessible. And I think that is silly, because having simple prose can make a lot of moments more impactful than having a very flowery, overwritten prose. I think his prose works perfectly for the stories he's telling. And his prose does switch up in different stories. Like Tress of the Emerald Sea, which was one of the secret novels, it was the first one this year. The prose is very different from like the Stormlight Archive, but it works perfectly for the story he was telling. And the Stormlight Archive has some of my favorite characters of all time, and his magic systems, he is the master of hard magic systems. They are so complex while being also easy to understand. Like, he does such a good job of explaining how it works and slowly revealing this magic system to the reader so that they aren't just overwhelmed. I also like Brandon Sanderson because he has such a vast array of books that you can really see his growth as an author from beginning to end. Similar with Stephen King, you can see a lot of the growth as he progresses in his career. And that's something I also really admire about Brandon Sanderson. And I know that there has been drama that is repeatedly recalled about Brandon Sanderson, and I won't get into it here, but I think he's handling it in the best way he can, and it's a much bigger discussion than I can say right here. All of that aside, his writing is phenomenal, his books are phenomenal, and I absolutely love Brandon Sanderson. Now for 1 and 2. Many of you probably know what these are, but what order they're in, this was very hard to choose. And I think I will get into why I've ranked it the way I have. Now, coming in at number 2 is Tamsin Mirror. Tamsin Mirror writes the Loch Tomb series, for anyone that hasn't watched any of my videos, which is my favorite series of all time. The reason I'm ranking her number 2 is because the series isn't done, and I've just recently finished The Realm of the Elderlings, which is done. So Tamsin Mirror is probably one of the most unique authors I've ever read. And her prose is just, LOL, I'm speechless. Her prose is just so fun. And even if you don't really like the story, I feel like most people still find it fun. And for some people that doesn't work. And I totally get the criticisms, and I get why this series is so polarizing, because it is so unique. It is so different from anything else I've ever read. And it's so niche within the sci-fi fantasy genres. And that's kind of why I love it. Because it's so unique and it's so unlike anything I've ever read. She has a masterful way of plotting, where she is telling you from page 1 things that will happen later, and it is so fun and impactful to go back and find those things and to reread it and pick up on all these clues that she was hinting, because a lot of people get frustrated with the plotting where everything is really confusing and you don't really know what's going on. But as you're learning more stuff, you're realizing that it was there all along. She was just kind of hiding it. And to me, that is so fun. And a lot of people don't like confusing stories like that because they feel like the author just kind of like shoehorned in something at the end to make it all make sense. But that is definitely not the case with Tamsin Mirror. It is intentional. She will explain it and it will make sense. It will all tie together well. And I think that having that trust in the author makes reading her books so much fun. So overall, her writing is fun. It's full of humor, but it's also full of these gut-wrenching lines, and her world and the lore involved with the world are so rich and unique and wild. Like, once you see what is going on, like at the end of Nona, I was just like blown away, because it was just, the reveals were wild and it makes it feel just phenomenal. So overall, Tamsin Mirror is an amazing author. I'm putting her at number 2 just because I haven't finished the series yet, obviously, because Electo isn't out yet, and I'm very excited to get to that. But this series is phenomenal, and I highly recommend everyone give it a shot. I definitely get why it's not for everyone, but give it a shot. Now, coming in at number 1 is Robin Hobb. Surprise, surprise. Robin Hobb is the author of The Realm of the Elderlings, and I recently finished Realm of the Elderlings, so this might be a little bit of recency bias, but this series, Realm of the Elderlings is so beautiful, and it is basically a study in writing characters. No one writes characters like Robin Hobb does. She is a master at her job. Her prose is phenomenal. Her plotting, beautiful. Her lore, amazing. But mostly her characters. Her characters are what sells the series. Her characters are just A1, unparalleled in fantasy. I have a full video I recently just did of why you should read The Realm of the Elderlings, so go check that out for more of my thoughts on Robin Hobb and more of me gushing about Robin Hobb. But she's number 1 for a reason. She is the master of fantasy, and the master of character, and the master of lore, and the master of authors. She's just the best. So if you haven't read The Realm of the Elderlings, what are you doing? Go read The Realm of the Elderlings. And that is my top 10 favorite authors. I will probably update this in a year for any new authors I've read or any of these potential authors as I read more of their works. Thank you guys for watching. If you could please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know down below who your top 3 favorite authors are, if you can think of them. I know it's very hard to rank your authors. If you really like my content, please hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post new videos. As always, your support means the world to me, and until next time, thank you guys.